The city bus rumbled down the congested streets of Metro City with mechanical precision as Sergeant Maya Rodriguez checked her mirrors one more time. 27 years old, military police academy top graduate, and, according to her service record, an exemplary officer with exceptional tactical capabilities. None of that seemed to matter now as she navigated the crowded downtown route, knowing she was serving what amounted to professional exile. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Transit Authority hadn't requested a military police officer as a driver. They hadn't requested a combat veteran either. What they'd gotten was both, wrapped up in a 5 feet 7 inches package with piercing hazel eyes and a reputation for challenging outdated security protocols. Back at the military police headquarters, the reassignment orders had been brief. Temporary duty with Metro Transit Authority, route security assessment. Translation: they needed someone to handle the dangerous downtown routes, and Maya's recent clash with her commander over excessive force policies had made her the perfect candidate. The radio crackled through her earpiece. Approaching Westfield Mall. Rodriguez. Watch yourself at this stop. Had some trouble there yesterday. Maya didn't respond. She'd learned months ago that engaging with the casual disrespect only made it worse. Instead, she checked her concealed sidearm one more time, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. The weapon was pristine, maintained with the kind of obsessive care that separated good officers from dead ones. Everything else about this assignment might be punishment, but she'd be damned if she'd let her standards slip. As the bus pulled up to the Westfield Mall stop in a cloud of exhaust, Maya caught sight of 4 men standing slightly apart from the regular commuters. Something about their positioning, their alertness despite trying to appear casual, triggered her training. They wore light jackets despite the warm weather, hands kept suspiciously close to their waistbands. Their eyes scanned the bus with too much interest, calculating rather than merely looking for seats. Transit Supervisor Derek Matthews was waiting at the dispatch booth near the mall entrance, arms crossed and an unlit cigarette tucked behind his ear. 42 years old, career transit worker, and according to the brief Maya had read before her assignment, a man who'd been passed over for management positions 3 times. He looked at her through the bus window with the kind of assessment usually reserved for faulty equipment. "So you're Rodriguez," he said, not bothering with pleasantries as she opened the door to let passengers board. "Heard they were sending us some kind of special forces type. Didn't expect them to gift wrap it." The men around him snickered. Maya kept her expression neutral. "Sir." "Well, since you're here to teach us all about security protocols and threat matrices, I figure we might as well call you something appropriate." His grin was sharp as broken glass. "How about Wonder Woman? Got a nice ring to it, don't you think?" More laughter from the assembled transit workers. Maya recognized the dynamic immediately. This wasn't just about her gender or her specialization. This was about power, about establishing hierarchy, about putting the new arrival in her place before she could upset the delicate ecosystem of transit authority masculinity that kept routes like this functioning. "Understood, sir," she said. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Maya had been preparing for this moment her entire career. Every dismissive comment, every closed door, every time she'd been told she was too aggressive or overthinking things, had been training for this exact scenario. She'd learned to watch, to listen, to catalog every detail, while maintaining the perfect facade of compliance. As the 4 men she'd spotted earlier boarded her bus, Maya noted every detail. The slight bulge under the tallest one's jacket, left side, consistent with a concealed handgun. The nervous energy of the youngest, no more than 20, constantly touching his pocket. The calculated way they spread out. 2 up front, 2 toward the middle, maintaining sightlines between them. The leader, a hard-faced man with a thin scar across his cheek, paid with crumpled bills and let his hand linger too long near the fare box, studying the camera placement. That first hour of her route, while the regular commuters made their way to offices and appointments, Maya drove with methodical precision. Her trained eye noted the 4 men maintaining their positions, occasionally exchanging glances, checking their phones simultaneously at precise intervals. They never exited at any stops, despite having been on the bus for over an hour. Classic surveillance, assessing patterns and security measures. The bus's security camera system fed directly to her dashboard display. a feature most drivers ignored. Maya didn't. She tracked the men's movements, their subtle communications, the way they assessed other passengers. Her mind calculated threat vectors, exit strategies, and response scenarios while her hands guided the bus through the congested downtown traffic with practiced ease. Someone from dispatch mentioned that her driving seemed almost musical, like she was humming under her breath. She wasn't, but she didn't correct them. Let them think she was just another distracted female officer who'd wandered into the wrong profession. The truth was far more dangerous. The next morning brought her first official briefing with Transit Security Director Carl Peterson. At 54, Peterson had the weary look of a man who'd spent decades fighting a losing battle against urban crime statistics. "Rodriguez, we've got you assigned to Route 42 again today," Peterson said, sliding a clipboard across his cluttered desk. "Nothing special, just keep the schedule and report any incidents." "Sir, I'd like to discuss something I observed yesterday," Maya began. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Peterson cut her off with a wave. "Look, Rodriguez, we've got 37 active routes and barely enough security personnel to monitor the transit hubs. Unless someone pulled a weapon, I don't have time for behavioral assessments or whatever they taught you in MP school. Sir, with respect, I observed 4 individuals conducting what appeared to be pre-operational surveillance. Same clothing style, tactical positioning, extended ride time without obvious destination, covert communications." Peterson sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Rodriguez, this is public transportation in a major city. We get all kinds, and most of them are just oddballs, not terrorists. The military mindset doesn't always translate to civilian life. These weren't oddballs, sir. Their behavior matches established patterns for what? Bus hijackings? This isn't Kabul, Rodriguez." Peterson's tone carried the weary condescension of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "Maybe you should focus on getting your route completed on time instead of inventing threats." Maya nodded and left without another word, but she'd memorized the faces, clothing, and behavioral patterns of the 4 men. More importantly, she'd confirmed what she'd suspected. The Transit Authority's threat assessment was operating on assumptions that hadn't been tested against current criminal tactics. The rest of the morning was spent on her route, ostensibly focusing on schedule adherence but actually mapping the most vulnerable points along Route 42. What she found was troubling. The section along Riverside Drive had the worst police coverage. The emergency call buttons installed in the buses were old and unreliable. The GPS tracking system updated too infrequently to be useful in a crisis. It was exactly the kind of vulnerability that experienced criminals would exploit. As lunchtime approached, Maya found herself in the driver's break room, listening to the casual conversation of transit workers who'd never had to think about tactical security. The talk was all about schedule complaints, management decisions, and weekend plans. But buried in the chatter was something more valuable, a clear picture of the system's operational weaknesses. "Heard the new tracking system installation got pushed back again," said Transit Officer Mike Torres, a 15-year veteran with salt and pepper hair. "Supposedly budget cuts mean we're stuck with the old units for another 6 months. "About time," replied driver Danny Walsh, barely 30 with perpetual stubble. "Been here 3 years and haven't seen a single incident that justified all this security paranoia." Maya filed that information away. A system expecting budget improvements was a system that had relaxed its vigilance. Perfect conditions for criminals who'd been watching, waiting, and planning. After lunch, she checked her bus thoroughly before beginning the afternoon route. She tested the silent alarm, confirmed her radio worked, and made minor adjustments to her seat position to ensure maximum mobility if needed. The other drivers watched with barely concealed amusement as she inspected the vehicle with military precision. "You planning to drive that bus into combat, Wonder Woman?" called one driver, generating laughter from the others. Maya ignored them and continued her inspection. She'd learned long ago that preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. When her afternoon route began, she wasn't surprised to see the same 4 men board at the Westfield Mall stop again. Their patterns were consistent with final reconnaissance before an operation. The tallest one now carried a backpack he hadn't had before. The youngest seemed more nervous, constantly checking his phone. The leader made eye contact with her in the mirror, a calculated assessment that sent a chill of recognition through her. She knew that look. The look of someone making final target confirmation. Maya keyed her radio during a stop, ostensibly checking in with dispatch, but actually trying once more to alert security. Dispatch. Bus 2187. Requesting security check at upcoming Riverside Drive section. 2187. This is dispatch. What's the nature of your security concern? The voice belonged to Sarah Mendez, one of the few dispatchers who didn't immediately dismiss her. 4 passengers, same as yesterday. Displaying pre-incident indicators. There was a pause before Mendez responded. Rodriguez. Peterson says unless there's an actual incident, we don't have personnel to spare for behavioral assessments. Continue your route as scheduled. Copy that, Maya replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the frustration building inside her. What transit security failed to understand was that by the time an actual incident occurred, it would be too late for an effective response. Prevention required recognition of indicators, and Maya was seeing every indicator of an imminent threat. That evening, as she parked her bus in the depot and completed her end-of-shift procedures, Maya made her decision. If the system wouldn't adapt to the threat, she would adapt to the system's limitations. She'd handle this herself. In her small apartment that night, Maya spread out a map of her route and began marking the most vulnerable sections, the emergency response times for different areas, and the locations where police presence was minimal. She added notes about the 4 men, their positions, behaviors, and the progression of their surveillance. The pattern was clear. They were most interested in the section along Riverside Drive, where the bus would be traveling a relatively isolated stretch, with few stops and limited escape options. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a text from Kevin Murphy, another military police officer who'd been reassigned to civilian security work after questioning command decisions. "How's life in transit?" the message read. "Interesting," she replied. "Might have a situation developing. 4 hostiles conducting surveillance. Transit security ignoring indicators." Murphy's response was immediate. "Need backup?" Maya considered it. Murphy was reliable, but bringing him in without official channels would complicate things. "Not yet. We'll advise if situation escalates." "Watch your 6, came his reply. The next morning, Maya arrived at the depot an hour early. She needed time to implement her contingency plan without raising suspicions. First, she adjusted the camera angles in her assigned bus slightly, not enough to be noticed during routine checks, but enough to provide better coverage of the areas where the 4 men typically sat. Next, she modified her seat harness to allow for faster release if needed. Finally, she placed her tactical folding knife in the left pocket of her uniform pants, where it would be accessible but not visible. Transit Supervisor Matthews watched her pre-trip inspection with obvious amusement. "Taking this pretty seriously for a glorified chauffeur job, aren't you, Wonder Woman?" "Just being thorough, sir," Maya replied, continuing her methodical check of the vehicle systems. "Well, don't let all that military precision make you late on your route. We're running a bus service, not a combat operation." His laughter followed her as she completed her inspection. If only he knew how thin the line between the two could become. As her bus pulled away from the depot, Maya felt a strange calm settle over her. This was familiar territory, not the streets of Metro City, but the mental space of operational readiness. She'd been here before, in convoy security operations and checkpoint management. The variables were different, but the fundamentals remained the same. Identify threats, control the environment, protect the innocent. The morning route proceeded normally. Regular commuters boarded and departed, the routine flow of a city moving through its day. Maya maintained her schedule precisely, neither early nor late, giving nothing away through her behavior. But her awareness was heightened, her senses tuned to the slightest anomalies in the patterns around her. At 11:42 a.m., as the bus approached the Westfield Mall stop, Maya spotted them. The 4 men stood at the bus shelter, but something had changed. Their casual demeanor from previous days was gone, replaced by a tightly controlled alertness that only someone with her training would recognize. The leader wore a jacket zipped all the way up despite the warm weather. The youngest had his hand in his pocket, gripping something. The tallest stood slightly apart, his backpack held close to his body rather than slung casually over a shoulder. They were no longer conducting surveillance. Today was operational. Maya keyed her radio one last time as she slowed the bus for the stop. Dispatch, Bus 2187. Potential security situation developing at Westfield Mall stop. 2187. What's the nature of your concern? It was Mendez again, her voice carrying a note of exasperation. 4 males showing pre-assault indicators. Request immediate security response. Peterson's voice cut in. Rodriguez, we've been through this. Unless you have an actual incident to report, continue your route. We don't have resources to chase hunches. Sir, this isn't a hunch. These individuals have. That's enough, Rodriguez. Do your job and drive the bus. That's an order. Maya released the radio button and took a deep breath. So be it. She was on her own. As the bus door opened at the Westfield stop, Maya cataloged every detail. The leader boarded first, his eyes scanning the interior in a tactical assessment, poorly disguised as looking for seats. The youngest followed, nervousness radiating from him in waves that any trained observer would recognize. The tallest came next, his backpack now clutched against his chest protectively. The fourth man, muscular with a shaved head, boarded last, positioning himself near the door. They paid their fares and moved into the positions they'd established during their surveillance days. The leader and the nervous youth toward the front, the tall man and the muscular one in the middle. The bus was half empty, with about 12 other passengers scattered throughout, collateral if things went wrong. Maya closed the doors and pulled away from the stop, her mind running through scenarios and responses. The next 5 minutes would tell the story. If they were planning to act, it would be as the bus entered the Riverside Drive section, where police response times were longest and escape routes most limited. She watched in her mirror as the leader made eye contact with each of his companions, a subtle nod passing between them. The nervous youth shifted in his seat, hand still in his pocket. The tall man unzipped his backpack slightly. The muscular one moved his hand inside his jacket. Maya's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. She knew what was coming as surely as she knew her own name. As the bus turned onto Riverside Drive, away from the busier commercial district, the leader stood up. In one smooth motion, he pulled a handgun from inside his jacket and called out in a commanding voice. Everyone stay calm and no one gets hurt. This is a hijacking. We're taking control of this bus. The nervous youth pulled a knife from his pocket, while the muscular man produced another handgun. The tall man reached into his backpack and pulled out what appeared to be plastic restraints. The other passengers froze in shock, some gasping, others shrinking into their seats. A woman near the back began to cry softly. "Driver!" the leader called, moving toward the front of the bus. "Pull over now. Do exactly what I say, and this goes easy." Maya met his eyes in the mirror, her expression carefully neutral. "Sir, I need to pull into a safe location. There's a turnout ahead." "Just stop the fucking bus," he demanded, raising his weapon to emphasize the point. "Yes, sir," Maya replied, the perfect image of compliance. What the hijackers didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that they'd just made the last mistake of their criminal careers. They'd chosen a target based on incomplete information. They'd assessed the bus driver as a middle-aged civilian woman, not recognizing the military bearing beneath the transit uniform. They'd seen the route as vulnerable without understanding that its very vulnerability had led to the placement of a highly trained tactical responder behind the wheel. They had 28 seconds before they would understand their error. Maya was counting every one of them. As she guided the bus toward the turnout, Maya activated the silent alarm with a subtle movement of her knee against the hidden switch. Even if dispatch had dismissed her warnings, the alarm would trigger an automatic police response. But help would take at least 7 minutes to arrive. She would need to control the situation until then. "Everyone on the floor! Hands where we can see them!" The nervous youth shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he waved his knife at the terrified passengers. The tall man moved down the aisle, pulling plastic zip ties from his backpack. "Hands behind your backs! Now!" The muscular one kept his gun trained on the passengers while moving toward Maya. "Once we stop, you're coming with us. You're our insurance policy." Maya nodded, the perfect picture of a frightened civil servant out of her depth. "Please don't hurt anyone." 20 seconds. She guided the bus into the turnout, a wide shoulder area alongside Riverside Drive, partially obscured from the main road by a line of trees. Perfect for their purposes, and for hers. 15 seconds. As the bus rolled to a stop, Maya's left hand released the steering wheel and dropped to her side, out of sight from the hijackers. 10 seconds. "Everyone, stay down!" the leader commanded as he moved toward Maya, gun extended. "Driver, shut it down and give me the keys." 5 seconds. Maya turned in her seat, eyes wide with apparent fear. "Please, I have children." "Should have thought about that before you got up this morning," the leader sneered, reaching for her with his free hand. "Now get up slowly." 0. In the span of a heartbeat, Maya's demeanor transformed. Her eyes sharpened with predatory focus. Her posture shifted from compliant to coiled, and her training took complete control of her actions. Her left hand shot up, catching the leader's gun arm at the wrist, while her right hand drove a precise strike to his throat. As he gasped and staggered, she twisted the weapon from his grasp with a textbook disarm maneuver, simultaneously driving her knee into his solar plexus. The leader collapsed, wheezing and clutching his throat, his gun now in Maya's possession. The muscular hijacker reacted quickly, raising his weapon toward her. But Maya was already moving, using the leader's falling body as momentary cover while she fired 2 precise shots. The first struck the muscular man's shoulder, causing his aim to falter. The second hit his hand, sending his weapon clattering to the floor. "Police! Everyone down!" Maya shouted with command presence that froze everyone in place. The nervous youth stood paralyzed, knife trembling in his hand as Maya swung the confiscated weapon toward him. "Drop it now!" When he hesitated, Maya fired a single shot that passed within inches of his ear, shattering a window behind him. The knife fell from his suddenly nerveless fingers. The tall man with the zip ties made a break for the rear emergency exit. Maya tracked his movement with mechanical precision, calculating angles and trajectories in the confined space of the bus. She fired once more, the bullet striking the metal frame of the seat just in front of him. "Next one goes in your spine," she stated with cold certainty. On the floor, hands behind her head. 28 seconds after the leader had announced the hijacking, all 4 men were subdued. The leader lay groaning on the floor near the driver's compartment. The muscular man sat clutching his bleeding shoulder in hand. The nervous youth had collapsed into the nearest seat, shaking uncontrollably. The tall man lay prone in the aisle, hands laced behind his head. Maya kept the weapon trained on them as she keyed her radio with her free hand. "Dispatch, bus 2187, hijacking in progress, suspects subdued. Military Police Rodriguez requesting immediate police response to my location on Riverside Drive turnout. 4 armed suspects, multiple civilian witnesses, situation contained." The radio erupted with questions and exclamations, but Maya ignored them, focusing on maintaining control of the scene. She addressed the terrified passengers with calm authority. "Everyone please remain seated. Police are on their way. You're safe now." A middle-aged man near the back spoke up, his voice trembling. "You're a cop." "Military police," Maya corrected, not taking her eyes off the subdued hijackers. "Currently assigned to transit security." As the adrenaline began to ebb, Maya allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The system had failed to listen, failed to recognize the threat indicators, failed to provide adequate support. But she hadn't failed. Her training, the very skills and mindset that had made her too intense for her regular duties, had just saved 16 lives. Outside, the first police sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming, but it was no longer needed. Wonder Woman had the situation well in hand. The flashing lights of police cruisers illuminated the bus interior, with pulsing blue and red as officers secured the scene. Detective James Mercer, a 20-year veteran with Metro City PD, surveyed the 4 handcuffed hijackers with professional interest. "Military police, huh?" he said, reviewing Maya's credentials. "Don't see that every day on a city bus." "Temporary assignment," Maya replied, keeping her explanation brief as she completed her incident statement. Mercer nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Must have pissed off someone important to land this detail. Maya didn't confirm or deny, focusing instead on providing precise details of the incident. She described the suspects' behavior patterns over the previous days, the tactical positioning, the weapons they carried, and the methodical way she had neutralized the threat. Her report was clinical and thorough, the kind that would withstand scrutiny in any courtroom. As the last of the passengers provided their statements and were escorted to replacement transportation, Transit Security Director Peterson arrived, his face a mask of professional concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. He spoke briefly with Detective Mercer before approaching Maya. "Rodriguez," he said, his tone carefully neutral in front of the police officers. "Quite an incident you handled today." "Yes, sir." As I attempted to report earlier. Peterson's jaw tightened slightly at the reminder of his dismissal of her warnings. "We'll need a complete debriefing back at headquarters. I've already fielded 3 calls from the Transit Authority Board and 1 from the mayor's office." Maya understood the subtext. This incident would generate publicity, questions about security protocols, and scrutiny of the decisions made by Transit Authority leadership. Peterson was already positioning himself for damage control. "I'll provide a comprehensive briefing, sir," she replied, "including my previous attempts to alert security about these individuals." Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, Transit Supervisor Matthews pushed through the gathered emergency personnel, his face flushed with what might have been concern or anger. Perhaps both. "Jesus Christ, Rodriguez," he said, looking at the bullet holes in the bus and the bloodstains on the floor. "You turned my bus into a war zone." "She prevented a hostage situation that could have ended much worse," Detective Mercer interjected, clearly unimpressed with Matthews' focus on the vehicle rather than the lives saved. Matthews had the sense to look embarrassed. "Right, of course. Good work and all that." He turned to Peterson. "But this is going to play hell with our insurance premiums." Maya gathered her belongings as the scene continued to unfold around her. The operational part was over. She had identified the threat, neutralized it, and protected the innocent. Now came the bureaucratic aftermath, the reports and reviews and inevitable questioning of her methods. This was familiar territory too. As she prepared to leave with Peterson for the debriefing, Detective Mercer pulled her aside briefly. "That was some impressive work," he said quietly. 4 armed perps, confined space, civilians present, and you handled it with minimal casualties. That's not luck, that's skill. Thank you, sir. Just applying my training." Mercer handed her his card. "The department could use someone with your capabilities. When you're done playing bus driver, give me a call." Maya took the card with a nod of acknowledgement. It was the first genuine recognition of her abilities she'd received since her reassignment. The debriefing at Transit Authority headquarters lasted well into the evening. Maya sat in a sterile conference room, repeating her account for an increasingly large audience of transit officials, security personnel, and eventually the authority's legal counsel. The questions evolved from operational details to policy concerns. "You were carrying a concealed weapon while on duty?" asked Howard Phillips, the Transit Authority's head lawyer, his pen poised over a legal pad already filled with notes. "I'm a military police officer on temporary assignment." Maya explained for the 3rd time. "My orders and Transit Authority policy both explicitly permit me to carry my service weapon." "But you didn't disclose that you intended to use deadly force in response to a security incident," Phillips pressed. "With respect, sir, I attempted multiple times to alert security to the threat these individuals posed. Those warnings were dismissed. When the hijacking began, I used necessary force to protect the passengers and myself." Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Rodriguez, no one is questioning your intentions, but there are procedures. Procedures that would have resulted in a hostage situation or worse." Maya interrupted, her patience finally wearing thin. 4 armed men had taken control of the bus. The response time for police backup was at least 7 minutes. In tactical situations, 7 minutes is an eternity. The room fell silent at her blunt assessment. Peterson exchanged glances with Phillips, a wordless communication that Maya recognized immediately. They were calculating liability, public relations implications, and how to frame the narrative in a way that protected the institution rather than acknowledging its failures. Finally, Transit Authority Director Eleanor Wallace, who had been silently observing from the head of the table, spoke up. Sergeant Rodriguez, your actions today likely saved lives. That fact is not in dispute. Wallace's voice carried the measured authority of someone who had navigated bureaucratic politics for decades. However, this incident raises serious questions about our threat assessment protocols and communication procedures. Yes, ma'am, Maya agreed. Those were precisely the concerns I attempted to raise before the incident occurred. Wallace nodded slowly. So I understand from the radio logs. We will need to conduct a thorough review of those protocols. She turned to Peterson. Carl, I want a complete assessment of our current security measures on my desk by tomorrow afternoon. Include Sergeant Rodriguez's recommendations. Peterson looked like he'd swallowed something bitter but nodded. Yes, Director. Wallace stood, signaling the end of the debriefing. Sergeant Rodriguez, you're on administrative leave pending the conclusion of the police investigation, as is standard procedure. I expect that will be resolved quickly given the circumstances. She extended her hand. Thank you for your service today. The acknowledgement was formal but genuine, and Maya appreciated it for what it was. Recognition from someone who understood the realities of security work, not just its public face. As she left the Transit Authority building, exhaustion finally catching up with her, Maya checked her phone. 17 missed calls, 28 text messages, and dozens of news alerts. Word had spread quickly. The first news headlines were already dubbing her Wonder Woman of Metro Transit, with breathless accounts of how a bus driver with military training had single-handedly thwarted a hijacking. The irony wasn't lost on her. The mocking nickname Matthews had given her was now being celebrated in headlines across the city. Among the messages was one from Kevin Murphy. Saw the news. Backup still available if needed. Maya smiled slightly as she texted back. Situation contained, but thanks. That night, in her apartment, Maya watched the news coverage with clinical detachment. The reports were predictably sensationalized, focusing on the drama of the confrontation rather than the systematic failures that had allowed it to develop. None mentioned her ignored warnings or the dismissive attitude of transit security leadership. Instead, they painted a picture of heroic quick thinking in the face of unexpected danger. Her phone rang shortly after the 11 o'clock news concluded. The caller ID showed Military Police Command. Sergeant Rodriguez, she answered, bracing herself for the inevitable questions. Maya, came the voice of Colonel Rebecca Hayes, her former commanding officer before the reassignment. Quite a day you've had. Yes, ma'am. The Transit Authority incident is all over the news. 4 armed suspects, civilian hostages, solo intervention. You've been busy for someone on a transportation security assessment detail. Maya detected a note of wry amusement beneath the professional tone. The assessment revealed significant security vulnerabilities, ma'am. Hayes actually chuckled at that. I can see that. The deputy commander wants a briefing tomorrow at 0900. Your temporary assignment is being re-evaluated in light of today's events. Understood, ma'am. I'll be there. After hanging up, Maya sat in the darkness of her apartment, considering the rapid shift in her circumstances. 24 hours ago, she had been a disciplined officer exiled to drive a city bus because she'd challenged outdated security protocols. Now she was a hero in the media, summoned by command, her warnings suddenly worthy of attention. The validation should have felt satisfying, but instead, it left a hollow feeling. It had taken a life-threatening crisis, one she had specifically warned about, to force the system to listen. The next morning, Maya arrived at military police headquarters, precisely 15 minutes before her scheduled briefing. The familiar environment of polished floors, crisp uniforms, and disciplined movement felt both welcoming and strange after weeks in the more casual atmosphere of the Transit Authority. Staff Sergeant Kevin Murphy was waiting in the reception area, a tablet computer under his arm and 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Maya with a knowing smile. Figured you could use this, he said. The deputy commander has been in since 0600 reviewing your file and the incident reports. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. How bad is it? Bad? Murphy raised an eyebrow. You single-handedly prevented a mass hostage situation while on a punishment detail. The media is calling you Wonder Woman, The mayor mentioned you in his morning press conference. The only people having a bad day are the transit security officials who ignored your warnings. Before Maya could respond, the office door opened and Colonel Hayes appeared. Rodriguez, Murphy, come in. The deputy commander is ready. The office of Deputy Commander Richard Chen was austere and functional, much like the man himself. At 58, Chen had served in 3 conflicts and was known for his direct approach to both operational and administrative matters. He gestured for Maya to sit as she came to attention. At ease, Sergeant. I've reviewed the preliminary reports of yesterday's incident. Chen's expression was unreadable as he studied her across his meticulously organized desk. Impressive tactical response under difficult conditions. Thank you, sir. What's less impressive is how you ended up in that situation to begin with. Chen's gaze shifted to a folder open before him. Your temporary reassignment to the Transit Authority followed an incident where you questioned Lieutenant Colonel Foster's security protocol revisions. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I expressed concerns that the proposed changes created vulnerabilities in our checkpoint procedures. Concerns that Foster characterized as insubordination and undermining command authority. Chen read from the file. Maya remained silent. The characterization wasn't accurate, but arguing the point wouldn't serve any purpose. And yet, Chen continued, at the Transit Authority, you identified a genuine security threat, attempted to report it through proper channels, were ignored, and ultimately prevented a potentially deadly hostage situation through direct action. He closed the folder. Do you see the pattern here, Rodriguez? Sir, you recognize security vulnerabilities that others either missed or dismissed. In both cases, your assessment was proven correct. Chen leaned forward slightly. The difference is that at the Transit Authority, you had the opportunity to demonstrate that correctness in a way that couldn't be ignored. Colonel Hayes spoke up from her position near the window. The Transit Authority has formally requested that Sergeant Rodriguez's temporary assignment be terminated immediately. Apparently, they're concerned about her excessive use of force and disregard for established security protocols. Chen's expression showed a flicker of disgust. In other words, they're covering their asses after ignoring specific warnings about a threat that materialized exactly as predicted. That would be my assessment, sir. Hayes agreed with professional restraint that didn't quite hide her contempt for the Transit Authority's position. Chen turned his attention back to Maya. Sergeant Rodriguez, your temporary assignment is indeed terminated, effective immediately. He paused, studying her reaction. Instead, you're being reassigned to the Tactical Training Division as an instructor for threat assessment and response protocols. The assignment was unexpected. Training Division was typically staffed by senior officers with years of field experience, not sergeants who had recently been on disciplinary reassignment. Sir? Maya couldn't quite keep the surprise from her voice. Your experience yesterday demonstrated precisely the skills we need to be teaching our personnel, Chen explained. The ability to identify threats before they materialize, to persist when your concerns are dismissed, and to act decisively when necessary. Those aren't just useful skills, they're essential ones. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity. Don't thank me yet, Chen warned, though there was a hint of approval in his eyes. You'll be working with Lieutenant Colonel Foster to revise the very security protocols you criticized. He's not going to make it easy for you. Maya maintained her professional demeanor, but inwardly she recognized the challenge and the opportunity this represented. She would have the chance to implement the changes she believed necessary, but would have to convince the very officer who had dismissed her concerns previously. I understand, sir. When do I begin? Immediately. Foster is expecting you at 1,100 hours. Chen stood, indicating the briefing was concluded. And Rodriguez, the Transit Authority may not appreciate what you did, but the Military Police Command does. Well done. As Maya left the Deputy Commander's office with Murphy, the reality of her situation began to sink in. Her exile had ended, but the real work was just beginning. Changing protocols meant changing mindsets, and that was often more difficult than neutralizing armed threats. Foster's going to fight you every step of the way, Murphy observed as they walked through the headquarters building. Probably, Maya agreed. But he'll have to acknowledge the tactical realities. Yesterday proved that threat indicators matter, and dismissing them can have serious consequences. Murphy smiled. Wonder Woman taking on the bureaucracy. This should be interesting. Maya shot him a warning look. Don't call me that. Too late, Murphy laughed, showing her his tablet screen with a news headline. Transits, Wonder Woman, returns to military police duty. The meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Foster was exactly as challenging as Chen had predicted. Foster, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for rigid adherence to established procedures, received Maya with cold professionalism that barely concealed his resentment at having to work with the officer whose actions had effectively vindicated her criticism of his protocols. Sergeant Rodriguez, he said, not bothering to stand when she entered his office. I understand you'll be consulting on our security protocol revisions. Yes, sir. The deputy commander has assigned me to the training division with a specific focus on threat assessment indicators and response protocols. Foster's jaw tightened slightly. One incident with the Transit Authority hardly qualifies you as an expert on threat assessment. With respect, sir, my assessment record shows consistent accuracy in identifying potential security threats. The transit incident was simply the most public demonstration of those capabilities. Foster leaned back in his chair, studying her with undisguised skepticism. The deputy commander may be impressed by your media coverage, Sergeant, but I'm more concerned with systematic, sustainable security procedures, not heroics. Maya recognized the attempt to dismiss her contribution by characterizing it as emotional rather than professional. It was a tactic she'd encountered throughout her career. The suggestion that decisive action based on accurate assessment was somehow less valuable than procedural compliance. Sir, my interest is also in systematic procedures. Specifically, procedures that incorporate early threat recognition and appropriate response options. The transit incident demonstrated the consequences of failing to do both. Foster's expression hardened. You'll prepare a detailed analysis of your proposed revisions for review by the Protocol Committee. Until then, I suggest you remember that you're here as a consultant, not a policymaker. Understood, sir. As Maya left Foster's office, she realized that this assignment would be as much a test as her time at the Transit Authority had been. The difference was that now, her assessment had been publicly validated. The challenge wasn't proving she was right. It was translating that validation into systematic change. Over the next 3 days, Maya immersed herself in developing comprehensive recommendations for the security protocol revisions. She analyzed incident reports from the past 5 years, identifying patterns where early threat indicators had been present but overlooked. She compiled research on pre-incident behavior recognition from both military and civilian security operations. She created detailed decision trees for threat assessment that could be implemented at checkpoints and security stations. Working from a small office in the training division, she often stayed well past normal duty hours, determined to create a proposal that even Foster couldn't dismiss on procedural grounds. The work was demanding but energizing. For the first time in months, she was applying her skills to their fullest extent. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as she was finalizing her report, Colonel Hayes stopped by her office. "How's it coming?" Hayes asked, glancing at the multiple screens displaying data analysis and procedural flowcharts. "Almost complete, ma'am. I've identified 17 specific points where our current protocols fail to address early threat indicators. I've developed alternatives that maintain operational efficiency while significantly improving threat recognition." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Foster won't make this easy, you know. He's been running security protocols his way for 8 years. Your Transit Authority incident embarrassed him by proving his approach had vulnerabilities. This isn't about embarrassing anyone, ma'am. It's about implementing more effective security measures. To you, perhaps." Hayes's expression was knowing. To Foster, it's about a junior officer challenging his authority and being proven right in a very public way. Don't underestimate how threatening that is to someone who's built their career on never being questioned. Maya considered this perspective. She had focused so intently on the operational aspects that she had given little thought to the psychological dynamics at play. Foster's resistance wasn't just about procedures. It was about professional identity and perceived authority. "How do I overcome that, ma'am?" Hayes smiled slightly. "By doing exactly what you did on that bus. Recognize the actual threat, in this case, Foster's fear of diminished authority, and develop a response that neutralizes it without creating unnecessary casualties. The advice was unexpected but insightful. Maya had approached the protocol revisions as a purely tactical problem, but Hayes was suggesting she needed to apply the same analytical skills to the interpersonal dynamics of implementing change. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll adjust my approach." When Maya presented her completed recommendations to the protocol committee 2 days later, she had indeed adjusted her approach. Rather than positioning her proposals as corrections to existing procedures, she framed them as enhancements that built upon the established framework. She credited Foster's original protocols for their structural soundness, while suggesting targeted improvements in specific areas. Most importantly, she presented clear evidence from multiple incidents, not just her own transit experience, showing how these enhancements could prevent security breaches before they escalated to crisis levels. The committee members, including Foster, listened with professional attention. When she concluded her presentation, the questions were probing, but not hostile. Foster himself remained largely silent, studying the data she had presented with unreadable expression. Finally, as the discussion wound down, Foster spoke directly to Maya for the first time since the presentation began. "Sergeant Rodriguez, your analysis is thorough." The admission seemed to cost him some effort. "The committee will need time to review these recommendations in detail before making any decisions." It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't dismissal either. For now, that was enough. As the committee members filed out of the conference room, Staff Sergeant Murphy, who had been observing from the back, approached with an appreciative whistle. "That was something to see," he said quietly. "You just got Foster to actually consider changing his precious protocols." "The same Foster who sent you to drive a bus for questioning those protocols." Maya began gathering her materials. "We'll see what the committee decides." "Oh, they'll adopt most of it," Murphy predicted confidently. "Maybe not all at once, and Foster will probably rename half of it to claim credit. But they'll implement it." "You know why?" "Why?" "Because you made it impossible to ignore without looking incompetent." Murphy grinned. "Wonder Woman strikes again." Maya shook her head at the nickname that refused to die, but couldn't entirely suppress a smile. Perhaps there were worse things to be called. 2 weeks after Maya's presentation to the Protocol Committee, a classified memo circulated through Military Police Command. The directive, signed by Deputy Commander Chen himself, announced the implementation of new threat assessment procedures across all MP security operations. The document outlined a comprehensive framework for identifying and responding to potential threats before they escalated to crisis levels. What the memo didn't mention was that these procedures were based almost entirely on Maya's recommendations. Instead, they were presented as collaborative enhancements developed by the Protocol Review Committee under Lieutenant Colonel Foster's leadership. Colonel Hayes dropped a copy of the memo on Maya's desk with a knowing smile. "Congratulations. 90% of your recommendations are being implemented command-wide." Maya scanned the document, recognizing her work, despite the bureaucratic language and rebranding. "And the credit goes to Foster." "Welcome to institutional change," Hayes said with a shrug. "The important thing is that your ideas are being implemented. Lives will be saved because of your work, whether your name is on it or not." Maya nodded, understanding the reality of organizational politics. Foster had found a way to adopt her recommendations while maintaining his authority and saving face. Exactly the kind of resolution that allowed progress without unnecessary casualties, as Hayes had suggested. "There's more," Hayes continued, pulling out a second document. "You're being transferred to the Advanced Training Division to develop and implement the new protocols, effective immediately." Maya looked up in surprise. Advanced training was an elite assignment, typically reserved for officers with far more seniority. Foster approved this? Foster recommended it. Hayes replied with evident satisfaction. His exact words were, "Rodriguez has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities that would be wasted in standard instructional roles." The backhanded compliment was as close to an admission of her value as Foster was likely to give. It was also a shrewd move on his part. By elevating her to a position where she could implement the changes properly, he associated himself with their success while removing her as a potential critic if implementation went poorly. "When do I start?" "Monday, 0800. You'll be working with Captain Sandra Reeves to develop the training curriculum." Hayes studied Maya thoughtfully. This is a significant opportunity, Rodriguez. Don't waste it proving you were right. Focus on making the system work better. Yes, ma'am. As Hayes left, Maya sat back in her chair, contemplating this unexpected development. 2 months ago, she had been exiled to drive a city bus because she had challenged established procedures. Now she was being tasked with implementing her own recommendations throughout the military police command structure. The symmetry wasn't lost on her, nor was the irony that it had taken a crisis, one she had specifically warned about, to create this opportunity. Captain Sandra Reeves proved to be everything Maya could have hoped for in a superior officer. At 42, Reeves was a decorated veteran with extensive field experience and a reputation for prioritizing effectiveness over tradition. She welcomed Maya to advanced training with refreshing directness. Rodriguez, I've reviewed your work on the protocol revisions and your handling of the transit incident. Both demonstrate exactly the kind of thinking we need more of. Reeves' office was functional and organized, much like the woman herself. Your job here is to turn your insights into actionable training that works in the field, not just in theory. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Good. Because we're implementing this command-wide in 60 days, and there are plenty of officers who think this is just bureaucratic overreaction to one isolated incident. Reeves handed Maya a tablet displaying a training schedule. Prove them wrong. The challenge energized Maya. For the next 6 weeks, she worked 16-hour days developing a comprehensive training program that translated her analytical approach into practical field applications. She created scenario-based exercises, decision-making frameworks, and assessment tools that could be implemented at every level of military police operations. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. For the first time in her career, Maya felt her capabilities were being fully utilized, her perspective valued rather than dismissed. Even the inevitable resistance from tradition-bound officers felt like a productive challenge rather than an insurmountable barrier. 4 weeks into the development process, Maya was working late in the training center when Kevin Murphy stopped by, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting the coffee on her desk. "Word is you haven't left this building in 3 days. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thanks. We're finalizing the field exercise protocols for next week's pilot program." Murphy nodded toward the newspaper. "Seen this?" Maya glanced at the headline, "Military Police Implement, Wonder Woman Protocol, Following Transit Heroes' Recommendations." She groaned. "Please tell me that's not what they're actually calling it." "Not officially," Murphy grinned. "But the nickname has stuck among the rank and file. The media got wind of it, and here we are." Maya shook her head, equal parts embarrassed and amused. The mocking call sign that Matthews had given her had somehow transformed into a symbol of innovation and effectiveness. "The reporter's been trying to get an interview with you," Murphy added. "PR office has been running interference." "Good. I have actual work to do." Murphy studied her for a moment. "You know, most people would be milking this for all it's worth. Hero status, media attention, vindication after being essentially punished for being right. That's a career-making combination." Maya looked up from her work. "This isn't about vindication or recognition. It's about implementing systems that work, that protect people. The rest is just noise." Murphy's expression shifted from teasing to something more thoughtful. "And that's exactly why the protocols are being taken seriously despite the silly nickname. People can tell the difference between someone seeking attention and someone focused on results." The pilot implementation of the new protocols began the following week with a select group of 50 military police officers from various specializations. Maya, working alongside Captain Reeves, led them through intensive training sessions that combined classroom instruction with practical field exercises. The scenarios were designed to test both threat recognition and appropriate response selection, identifying potential threats before they materialized, escalating concerns through proper channels, and taking decisive action when necessary. Each exercise was followed by detailed debriefing sessions where Maya pushed the participants to articulate their decision-making process. During one particularly challenging scenario involving a simulated checkpoint breach, Staff Sergeant James Wilson, a 15-year veteran known for his traditional approach, raised an objection. "With respect, Sergeant, this approach undermines established chain of command. You're suggesting that junior personnel should bypass their immediate superiors if their concerns aren't addressed." Maya had anticipated this criticism. It was the same objection Foster had raised initially, framed in terms of maintaining order and discipline. "I'm suggesting that threat identification is everyone's responsibility, regardless of rank," she clarified. "The protocols include multiple notification levels precisely to respect chain of command, but they also acknowledge that time-sensitive threats may require expedited response paths." "Sounds like justification for insubordination to me," Wilson pressed, clearly unconvinced. Maya considered her response carefully, aware that this moment could either reinforce or undermine the entire training objective. This wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about changing a mindset that prioritized hierarchical compliance over effective security. "Sergeant Wilson, let me ask you this. If you identified a credible threat to personnel under your command and your immediate superior dismissed that threat without proper assessment, what would your priority be? Protecting your team or maintaining the chain of command?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "That's a false choice. Both are essential to effective operations." "Exactly," Maya agreed. "These protocols aren't about undermining authority. They're about ensuring that valid security concerns receive appropriate attention, even when standard channels prove insufficient. The goal is to strengthen the system, not circumvent it." The exchange had drawn the attention of the entire training group. Maya could see thoughtful expressions replacing skeptical ones as the officers considered the implications of her approach. Captain Reeves, who had been observing silently, chose that moment to intervene. "The transit incident provides a clear example. Sergeant Rodriguez identified specific threat indicators and reported them through proper channels multiple times. Those warnings were dismissed without adequate assessment. The result was a preventable crisis that endangered civilian lives." She surveyed the assembled officers with a steady gaze. "These protocols aren't about empowering individuals to ignore the chain of command. They're about ensuring that legitimate security concerns receive proper attention regardless of who identifies them. That's not insubordination, that's doing our job." The room fell silent as the officers processed this perspective. Maya noticed Wilson nodding slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than resistant. The training continued for 3 intensive days, with each session building on the previous one. By the final exercise, a complex scenario involving multiple potential threats embedded within routine operations, Maya saw a marked change in the participants' approach. Even the initially skeptical officers were applying the new protocols with increasing confidence, identifying subtle indicators that would have been overlooked under the previous system. During the final debriefing, Captain Reeves addressed the group with evident satisfaction. "What you've demonstrated over these 3 days is exactly why these protocols are being implemented command-wide. Effective security isn't just about responding to threats. It's about recognizing and addressing them before they become crises." She gestured toward Maya. "Sergeant Rodriguez has developed a framework that enhances our capabilities without compromising our operational structure. I expect each of you to take these protocols back to your units and implement them with the same thoroughness you've shown here." As the officers filed out, many stopped to thank Maya personally, including Sergeant Wilson, who offered a gruff but sincere acknowledgement. "Never thought I'd be taking security advice from someone they call Wonder Woman, but your system makes sense. Should have been implemented years ago." In the weeks that followed, the protocols were rolled out to military police units across the command. Maya found herself traveling to various installations, conducting training sessions, and addressing questions from officers at all levels. The reception varied from enthusiastic adoption to skeptical compliance, but the overall trend was positive. Reports began filtering back of potential threats identified and addressed using the new protocols: a suspicious pattern of activity near a sensitive installation, unusual behavior from a contractor with access to secure areas, anomalous communication traffic that proved to be an early indicator of a planned breach attempt. Each successful intervention reinforced the value of the approach Maya had developed. 3 months after the initial implementation, Deputy Commander Chen called Maya to his office for an assessment briefing. Colonel Hayes and Captain Reeves were already present when she arrived. "Sergeant Rodriguez." Chen greeted her with his characteristic directness. "I've been reviewing the implementation reports from across the command. The results are impressive. 32% increase in early threat identification, 47% reduction in false positives, and measurable improvement in response coordination." He tapped a folder on his desk. "Even more telling are the field commander evaluations. Initial skepticism has largely been replaced by strong endorsement. The protocols are working. Thank you, sir, Maya responded, professionally pleased but not surprised by the data. She had designed the system based on real-world operational needs, not theoretical constructs. There's more, Chen continued. The Joint Security Command has expressed interest in adapting your protocols for wider implementation across military branches. They're particularly impressed by the balance between systematic analysis and operational flexibility. This was unexpected. Joint Security Command oversaw coordination between all military service branches on security matters. Implementation at that level would represent acceptance of her approach throughout the entire military security apparatus. That's significant, sir. Indeed, Chen agreed. Which brings me to the reason for this meeting. JSC has requested that you be assigned as liaison to their protocol adaptation team. It would mean promotion to lieutenant and temporary duty in Washington for approximately 6 months. Maya processed this information carefully. The assignment would be a career accelerator, providing visibility and influence far beyond her current position. It would also mean leaving the direct implementation work she had been focused on. I'm honored by the consideration, sir. However, I'm concerned about maintaining momentum with the current implementation. We're still in the critical adaptation phase. Chen exchanged glances with Hayes and Reeves. Your dedication to seeing this through is commendable, Rodriguez. However, Captain Reeves has assured me that the implementation is proceeding effectively under her supervision. Reeves nodded in confirmation. The foundation is solid, Rodriguez. The team you've trained can handle the ongoing implementation. This opportunity with JSC means your work will have impact beyond just military police operations. Maya considered this perspective. Her goal had never been personal advancement or recognition. It had been implementing effective security measures that protected people. If her protocols could serve that purpose on a broader scale, the assignment made sense. In that case, sir, I accept the assignment. Excellent, Chen said with satisfaction. Your orders are being processed. You'll report to JSC headquarters next Monday. As Maya left the meeting, Colonel Hayes fell into step beside her. Congratulations, Lieutenant. Not many officers go from disciplinary reassignment to Joint Security Command in less than 6 months. Maya smiled slightly at the irony. Certainly not the career path I anticipated. The best ones rarely are, Hayes observed. When you get to Washington, remember what got you there. Keep focusing on effectiveness over recognition, substance over form. The brass at JSC will respect that approach even more than the commanders here did. Yes, ma'am. That weekend, as Maya prepared for her new assignment, she received an unexpected visitor. Transit Supervisor Derek Matthews stood awkwardly at her door, looking considerably less confident than he had during their first encounter months earlier. Rodriguez, he greeted her, shifting uncomfortably. Heard you're heading to Washington. Big promotion. News travels fast, Maya observed neutrally, wondering about the purpose of his visit. Matthews cleared his throat. Look, I came to say, well, I was wrong about you. The way I treated you when you first came to transit, that was out of line. The admission was clearly difficult for him, and Maya appreciated the effort it represented. Thank you for saying that. Got something for you, too. Matthews handed her a small package. The drivers chipped in. Figured you should have this. Inside was a custom-made patch featuring a stylized female figure with the words Wonder Woman Protocol embroidered beneath it. The design was professional and dignified, transforming what had begun as mockery into a symbol of respect. They're calling it that officially now, Matthews explained. The new security procedures at transit. Everyone has to be trained in threat recognition and response protocols, your protocols. Already stopped 2 potential incidents last month. Maya studied the patch, touched by the gesture and what it represented. Thank you. I'm glad the protocols are making a difference. Yeah, well, Matthews shuffled his feet slightly. Just wanted you to know that sometimes even an old dog like me can learn new tricks. Safe travels to Washington. After he left, Maya added the patch to her growing collection of mementos from this unexpected chapter of her career. The newspaper clipping, her original Transit Authority ID, the commendation letter from the mayor. Each item told part of the story of how a punishment assignment had transformed into an opportunity for meaningful change. The following Monday, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez reported to Joint Security Command headquarters in Washington, D.C. The sprawling complex housed the coordinated security operations for all military branches, a vastly larger scope than the military police command she had worked with previously. Colonel James Sullivan, the JSC Protocol Development Director, received her with professional courtesy that couldn't quite hide his curiosity. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, welcome to JSC. Your reputation precedes you." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the protocol adaptation effort." Sullivan gestured for her to take a seat. "I've reviewed your work extensively. The integration of threat recognition patterns with escalated response frameworks is particularly impressive. It represents a significant advancement over our current compartmentalized approach. The key is balancing systematic analysis with operational flexibility, sir. Security threats rarely present themselves in textbook fashion." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "That's precisely why we're interested in implementing your approach across service branches. The ability to identify and address emerging threats before they materialize is a capability we need to strengthen throughout our security operations." He pushed a folder across the desk toward her. "Here's your first assignment. We need you to assess the current threat recognition protocols for 5 key installation types and identify adaptation requirements for your methodology. You'll be working with a team of security specialists from each service branch." Maya accepted the folder, already mentally outlining the approach she would take. "When do I meet the team?" "They're waiting for you now, actually. Conference Room B." Sullivan stood, indicating the meeting was concluded. "And Lieutenant, they're expecting Wonder Woman. Don't disappoint them." Maya suppressed a sigh at the persistent nickname but recognized the underlying message. Her reputation had created certain expectations, and meeting those expectations would be essential to the success of this assignment. The Joint Service Protocol Adaptation Team consisted of 12 security specialists representing Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. As Maya entered the conference room, she felt their assessing gazes. Some curious, some skeptical, all waiting to see if she measured up to the stories they'd heard. Instead of addressing those expectations directly, Maya launched immediately into the substance of their assignment. "Good morning. I understand we have 60 days to develop integrated threat recognition and response protocols adaptable to multiple security environments. Let's start by identifying the core commonalities and critical differences across your respective operational contexts." The direct, professional approach set the tone for the work that followed. Over the next few weeks, Maya guided the team through a systematic analysis of existing protocols, identifying strengths to preserve and weaknesses to address. The process was challenging, requiring her to navigate not only technical security considerations, but also the distinct organizational cultures of each service branch. During one particularly difficult session focused on notification pathways, Navy Lieutenant Commander Jackson voiced the concern that several team members had been hinting at. "The escalation protocols you're proposing could undermine established command structures. In naval operations, clear hierarchy is essential to effective functioning." It was a variation of the same objection Sergeant Wilson had raised during the initial training sessions, but with greater implications given the scale of implementation they were considering. Maya addressed the concern directly. "Commander, the protocols don't replace or undermine command structures. They enhance their effectiveness by ensuring that critical security information reaches appropriate decision-makers in time to act. Think of it as creating additional sensors for the existing system, not rewiring its control mechanisms." Air Force Major Chen added her perspective. "The lieutenant has a point. Our current strictly hierarchical reporting systems sometimes delay critical information. During the Jenkins Air Base incident last year, a junior airman identified suspicious behavior but couldn't get attention from his superiors until it was almost too late." "Exactly," Maya agreed. "These protocols create pathways for legitimate security concerns while maintaining appropriate oversight. They're designed to strengthen command effectiveness, not diminish it." The discussion continued, with team members gradually shifting from skepticism to engagement, offering examples from their own experience where more flexible reporting structures might have prevented security breaches. By session's end, even the initially resistant officers were contributing constructively to the protocol design. As the weeks passed, Maya found herself increasingly respected by the JSC leadership, not just for her technical expertise, but for her ability to bridge the cultural gaps between service branches. Her focus on practical effectiveness, rather than theoretical ideals, resonated with the operational commanders, who would ultimately implement the protocols. The Wonder Woman nickname followed her, of course, but it had evolved from a punchline to a shorthand for the approach she represented: observant, persistent, and effective despite institutional barriers. Maya had made peace with it, recognizing that symbols sometimes served important purposes in organizational change. 6 weeks into the assignment, as the protocol adaptation was nearing completion, Maya was called to an unexpected meeting with General Robert Davis, the Joint Security Command Director. His office on the top floor of the headquarters building offered a panoramic view of Washington that emphasized the scope of responsibility his position entailed. "Lieutenant Rodriguez." He greeted her, dispensing with formalities. "I've been following your work with the adaptation team. Impressive progress in a short time frame." "Thank you, sir. The team has been exceptional." Davis nodded, studying her with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating both personnel and threats. "What's more impressive is how you've managed to get Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard security specialists to agree on a unified approach. That's something of a minor miracle in these halls." Maya allowed herself a small smile. "They all want the same thing, sir: effective security protocols that actually work in the field." Once we focused on that common goal, the service-specific concerns became manageable. "A valuable lesson in itself," Davis observed. He picked up a folder from his desk, the completed protocol adaptation proposal. "I've reviewed this thoroughly. It represents a significant advancement over our current systems. The integration of early threat recognition with flexible response options addresses vulnerabilities we've been concerned about for some time." "Thank you, sir." Davis set the folder down and fixed her with a direct gaze. "I'll be recommending immediate implementation across all service branches, with you continuing to oversee the training and adaptation process. That would mean promotion to captain and permanent assignment to JSC." The offer was substantial: a 2-rank promotion and prestigious permanent position that would cement her influence on military security protocols for years to come. It was far beyond what Maya could have anticipated when she'd been assigned to drive a city bus just months earlier. "I'm honored by your confidence, sir." Davis wasn't finished. "Before you accept, you should know what you're getting into. Implementing these protocols command-wide means challenging established practices across 5 service branches. You'll face resistance from tradition-bound officers, bureaucratic inertia, and territorial protectiveness. Your success so far has been impressive, but the real battle is just beginning." Maya considered this sobering assessment. The general was right. Translating the protocols from proposal to standard practice throughout the military would be far more challenging than developing them in the first place. It would require years of persistent effort, navigating complex institutional politics, while maintaining focus on the ultimate goal of enhanced security effectiveness. "With respect, sir, that battle began the moment I questioned Lieutenant Colonel Foster's security protocols and got reassigned to drive a city bus," Maya replied. "Everything since then has been about ensuring that security decisions are based on effectiveness rather than tradition or convenience. I'm prepared to continue that work however long it takes." Davis smiled slightly, apparently satisfied with her response. "I thought you might say that. The official orders will be processed next week. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare your team for the implementation phase. They'll need to become trainers themselves to reach all the necessary personnel." "Yes, sir." As Maya left the general's office, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. From punishment assignment to protocol development, from mockery to respect, from isolation to institutional influence, each step had built upon the previous one, creating a path she could never have anticipated. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken a crisis, one she had specifically warned about, to create the opportunity for meaningful change. But perhaps that was often how progress occurred, not through gradual evolution but through moments of clarity that revealed the gap between what was and what should be. As she walked through the JSC headquarters, passing officers from all service branches, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Wonder Woman protocol might have begun as a joke at her expense, but it had become something far more significant, a framework for identifying and addressing threats before they materialized, regardless of who recognized them or where they fell in the organizational hierarchy. That evening, as she prepared for the next day's team meeting, Maya added the Transit Authority patch to her collection of mementos. From mockery to meaning, from punishment to purpose, The journey had been unexpected but ultimately valuable, not just for her career, but for the thousands of service members and civilians whose security would be enhanced by protocols that prioritized effectiveness over tradition. The nickname might fade with time, but the approach it represented would continue to protect people long after the story of its origin was forgotten. And that, Maya reflected, was worth far more than any recognition or promotion. The security badge beeped green as I swiped into Meridian Industries for what I didn't know would be the last time. Victoria Steinberg, the CEO's wife and newly appointed head of operations, had no idea that the woman she was about to fire for insubordination had quietly invested $2 million of her own money to help save this company 3 years ago. She had no idea that I owned 15% of the business she thought she controlled. And she definitely had no idea that her husband had begged me to stay silent about our partnership to avoid the very drama that was about to explode in both our faces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Chicago headquarters, casting long shadows across the marble lobby. I had arrived early, as always, my heels clicking against the polished stone as I made my way to the executive elevator. The familiar weight of my leather portfolio felt heavier today, filled with contracts and documents that would soon become my lifeline. Meridian Industries had been my second home for 8 years. What started as a mid-level marketing position had evolved into something much more significant. I had climbed from marketing coordinator to senior vice president of strategic development, earning every promotion through late nights, successful campaigns, and an almost supernatural ability to turn struggling accounts into profit centers. But my real story with Meridian began 3 years ago, during what we now called the dark winter. The company was bleeding money, losing major clients and facing bankruptcy. Traditional investors had walked away, banks had closed their doors, and competitors were circling like vultures. That's when James Steinberg, our CEO and founder, had approached me with a proposition that changed everything. "Elena," he had said, sitting across from me in his oak-paneled office, "I know this is unconventional, but I need a partner, not just an employee. Someone who believes in this company's future as much as I do." The offer was simple yet complex. Invest $2 million of my personal savings to help stabilize the company, become a silent partner with 15% ownership, and continue working as an executive while keeping the partnership confidential. The confidentiality wasn't about shame or secrecy. It was about protecting the company culture and avoiding the complications that might arise from employees knowing their colleague was also their boss. I had inherited money from my grandmother's estate, money I had been saving for my own entrepreneurial dreams. But Meridian felt like family, and James's vision for expansion into sustainable technology aligned perfectly with my values. The decision to invest was both emotional and strategic. I believed in the company's potential, I trusted James's leadership, and I saw an opportunity to be part of something transformative. The partnership agreement was ironclad. I would receive 15% of all profits, have voting rights on major decisions, and maintain full access to financial records. In return, I would continue my role as senior vice president, while providing strategic guidance that only a true owner could offer. The arrangement worked beautifully, until Victoria entered the picture. James had married Victoria Pemberton 2 years ago, a whirlwind romance that surprised everyone who knew him. Victoria came from old money, the kind of generational wealth that bred confidence and entitlement in equal measure. She was stunning, sophisticated, and had never worked a day in her life until she decided that Meridian Industries needed her fresh perspective. Her integration into the company had been gradual but persistent. First, she started attending board meetings as James's wife, offering unsolicited opinions about marketing strategies and operational efficiency. Then she began showing up to client meetings, introducing herself as a consultant, and making promises that the actual team would have to deliver on. Finally, 6 months ago, James had created the position of head of operations specifically for her, a decision that had sent shockwaves through the executive team. Victoria's management style was a masterclass in privileged incompetence. She would schedule mandatory meetings during lunch breaks, demand last-minute reports that served no strategic purpose, and micromanage projects she didn't understand. Her favorite phrase was, "I don't think you're hearing me," which she used whenever someone dared to disagree with her ideas or point out potential problems with her initiatives. The tension between us had been building for months. As Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, I reported directly to James. But Victoria had been inserting herself into my projects, questioning my decisions, and undermining my authority with my team. She seemed particularly threatened by my relationship with James and my deep institutional knowledge of the company. The breaking point came during our quarterly strategy meeting last Tuesday. We were discussing the Hartwell Corporation contract, a multi-million-dollar deal that I had been nurturing for over a year. Hartwell was interested in our new sustainable packaging solutions, and the contract would represent the largest single deal in Meridian's history. Victoria had decided, without consulting me or the legal team, to propose a completely different service package to Hartwell. Her proposal was not only outside our core competencies, but also promised delivery timelines that were physically impossible to meet. When I raised these concerns during the meeting, Victoria's face had flushed with anger. "Elena, I don't think you're hearing me," she had said, her voice sharp with authority. "This is the direction we're taking, and I need you to be a team player." "Victoria, I understand your perspective, but we need to consider the practical implications," I had replied, keeping my voice steady despite my frustration. "If we promise Hartwell something we can't deliver, we'll lose not only this contract but also our reputation in the industry." The room had gone silent. Other executives stared at their laptops or shuffled papers, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. James had shifted in his chair, his face revealing nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria's eyes had narrowed. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm questioning the feasibility of the proposal," I had answered honestly. "It's my job to ensure our strategic initiatives are realistic and achievable." That response had sealed my fate. The next morning, Victoria had scheduled a private meeting with me. Her corner office was a monument to her expensive taste. Imported furniture, fresh orchids, and a collection of art that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. She sat behind her glass desk like a queen holding court, her perfectly manicured hands folded in front of her. "Elena, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she began, her voice deceptively calm. "I've come to the conclusion that you're not aligned with the company's new direction." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. "What exactly are you saying, Victoria?" "I'm saying that your attitude yesterday was completely inappropriate. You questioned my authority in front of the entire leadership team, and that kind of insubordination is unacceptable." The word insubordination hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I realized that she had already made her decision before I walked into the room. "Victoria, I was doing my job. Strategic analysis includes identifying potential risks and challenges. That's what you pay me for." She leaned forward, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "What I pay you for?" "Elena, let me be clear about something. This is my husband's company, which makes it my company. You work for me now, and I won't tolerate employees who think they know better than management." The irony was so thick I could taste it. If only she knew that I didn't work for the company. I partially owned it. If only she realized that her husband had trusted me with confidential financial information and strategic decisions that she had never been privy to. If only she understood that the money she was spending on her office renovations and unnecessary consulting fees was partially my money. But I couldn't say any of that. The partnership agreement included strict confidentiality clauses, and revealing my ownership stake without James's consent could void the entire arrangement. I was trapped by the very agreement that was supposed to protect me. "I understand your concerns," I said carefully. "Perhaps we can discuss this with James and find a way to move forward that works for everyone." Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "James supports my decisions completely. In fact, he's the one who suggested that we might need to make some changes to the leadership team." My heart sank. Either James was lying to his wife about his support, or he was throwing me under the bus to avoid marital conflict. Either possibility was devastating. "What are you proposing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm proposing that today is your last day with Meridian Industries. Security will escort you out after you've cleaned out your office. Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks, severance, which I think is quite generous considering the circumstances. The words hit me like physical blows. 8 years of my career, 3 years of secret partnership, and millions of dollars of my own money invested in this company, and she was dismissing me like an intern who had spilled coffee on important documents. Victoria, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Elena. You're fired. For insubordination, for questioning authority, and for creating a hostile work environment. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what was happening. Victoria continued shuffling papers on her desk, clearly considering the conversation finished. I'd like to speak with James before I go, I said finally. James is in meetings all day. He's asked me to handle this situation, and that's what I'm doing. She looked up at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Security will be here in 5 minutes to walk you out. I suggest you use that time to start packing. The walk back to my office felt surreal. Colleagues I had worked with for years looked up from their computers, their faces a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and I could see in their expressions that they already knew what had happened. My office was a testament to 8 years of dedication. Awards lined the walls, client thank you notes filled a bulletin board, and family photos sat beside industry recognition plaques. I had built relationships, closed deals, and created strategies that had generated millions in revenue. Now I had 5 minutes to fit my professional life into cardboard boxes. As I packed, my mind raced through the implications of what had just occurred. Victoria had fired me, but she had no legal authority to terminate a 15% owner of the company. The partnership agreement clearly stated that only a majority vote of all partners could remove me from my ownership position. Victoria didn't even know about the partnership, which meant she certainly hadn't convened any kind of vote. My employment contract was separate from my ownership stake. She could fire me as an employee, but she couldn't steal my investment or my ownership rights. The question was, what would I do with that knowledge? 2 security guards appeared in my doorway, looking apologetic but determined. They were men I had chatted with in the lobby for years, and their discomfort was obvious. "Sorry, Ms. Rodriguez," one of them said quietly. "We have to follow protocol." "I understand," I replied, closing the last box. "Just doing your jobs." The walk through the office felt like a funeral procession. Some colleagues pretended to be busy with their work, while others watched openly. A few offered sympathetic nods or whispered good luck as I passed. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent, except for the mechanical hum of the building's machinery. As we reached the main floor, I turned to the security guards. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure, Ms. Rodriguez. Do either of you have the authority to fire 15% owners of this company?" They looked confused. "Ma'am, we just escort people out. We don't know anything about ownership." I smiled for the first time that morning. That's what I thought. Standing on the sidewalk outside Meridian Industries, holding my boxes and watching employees stream in and out of the building, I felt a mixture of devastation and determination. Victoria Steinberg thought she had won, thought she had eliminated a threat to her authority and secured her position as the power behind her husband's throne. She had no idea that she had just declared war on someone who owned part of the battlefield. The Chicago wind whipped through the downtown canyon, carrying the scents of coffee shops and exhaust fumes. I loaded my boxes into my car and sat behind the wheel for a moment, staring up at the glass tower that housed the company I had helped save and the business I still partially owned. My phone buzzed with a text message from my assistant, Maria. "Can't believe what happened. Everyone is talking about it. Call me when you're ready." Another message from David Chen, my closest colleague in the Strategic Development Department. "This is insane. Victoria has lost her mind. The whole team is in shock." And then, surprisingly, a message from James himself. "Elena, I need to explain. Can we meet tonight? This isn't what I wanted." I stared at that last message for a long time. James needed to explain? He was the one person who could have prevented this disaster, the one person who knew about my investment and partnership status. Either he was complicit in Victoria's decision, or he was too weak to stand up to his wife. Neither possibility inspired confidence. But I also knew that I needed information before I could plan my next move. The partnership agreement gave me certain rights and protections, but exercising those rights would require careful strategy and impeccable timing. I started my car and drove toward my apartment, my mind already working through possibilities. Victoria thought she had checkmated me, but she didn't realize she was playing against someone who had been studying the board for 3 years. The game was just beginning, and I held cards she didn't even know existed. My apartment felt smaller that evening, the walls seeming to close in as I spread the contents of my partnership agreement across my dining room table. The legal documents looked so clinical under the warm lamplight, but they represented the most important decision of my professional life. I had invested $2 million and 3 years of my career into this company, and Victoria's dismissal couldn't erase that history with a simple security escort. The partnership agreement was 27 pages of carefully crafted legal language, but the key sections were crystal clear. As a 15% owner, I had irrevocable rights to financial transparency, strategic input, and profit distribution. More importantly, Section 12.3 explicitly stated that ownership could only be terminated through a majority vote of all partners, with proper notice and justifiable cause. Victoria's personal vendetta didn't qualify as justifiable cause, and she certainly hadn't convened any partnership meeting. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the office, messages of support from colleagues, expressions of outrage from clients who had heard the news, and several missed calls from reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. The business community in Chicago was smaller than people realized, and news of my termination was spreading faster than I had anticipated. Around 7 o'clock, James finally called. His voice sounded strained when I answered, like a man trying to navigate between two dangerous precipices. "Elena, we need to talk. Can you meet me at Riverside Grill in 30 minutes? I'll explain everything." Riverside Grill was a quiet restaurant tucked away from the main business district, the kind of place where sensitive conversations could happen without unwanted ears. I arrived first and chose a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. When James walked in, he looked like he had aged 5 years in a single day. He slid into the seat across from me, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. "Elena, I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen." "But you let it happen," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You're the CEO, James. You have the authority to overrule your wife's decisions, especially when they involve your business partners." He winced at the word, partners. "It's complicated. Victoria doesn't know about our arrangement, and if I had intervened today, she would have demanded to know why. I wasn't prepared for that conversation. So you threw me under the bus to avoid an uncomfortable discussion with your wife." "I was buying time," he said quickly. "I thought I could fix this quietly, maybe convince her that firing you was a mistake without revealing the partnership details." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I had trusted with my financial future. "James, do you understand what your wife just did? She didn't just fire an employee, she attempted to steal from a business owner. She tried to eliminate a partner without following any legal protocols." His face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Victoria's actions today constitute a breach of fiduciary duty and potentially fraud. She made a unilateral decision about company ownership without the authority to do so. If I wanted to, I could have her arrested." The waiter approached our table, but James waved him away with a distracted gesture. "Elena, please, let me fix this. I'll talk to Victoria tonight, explain the situation, and have you reinstated by tomorrow morning." "Reinstated?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "James, your wife called me insubordinate for doing my job. She questioned my loyalty to a company I helped save with my own money. She humiliated me in front of security guards and made me pack up 8 years of my career in 5 minutes. And you think a simple reinstatement will fix this?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our most stressful business negotiations. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to honor our partnership agreement. I want full transparency about what's been happening in my absence from decision-making processes. And I want to understand how your wife gained so much authority over a company she has no legal claim to." James was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Victoria has been pushing for more control ever since we got married. I have everything you requested: financial statements, contract summaries, and strategic planning documents. I took the folder and began reviewing the contents. What I found was both disturbing and enlightening. In the 3 months since Victoria had taken over as head of operations, the company's expenses had increased by 37%. She had hired expensive consultants, upgraded office furniture, and instituted new policies that required additional administrative staff. More troubling were the contracts she had authorized without proper review. The Hartwell Corporation deal that had sparked our confrontation was just one example. Victoria had been making promises to clients that the company couldn't fulfill, creating potential liability issues that could cost millions in damages. "James, have you reviewed these contracts that Victoria has been approving?" He shifted uncomfortably. "She's been handling operational details, so I could focus on long-term strategy." "This isn't operational detail. This is fundamental business management. Look at this Hartwell contract." She promised delivery schedules that would require us to hire 50 additional employees and lease new manufacturing space. The profit margins don't support those commitments. As I spoke, I noticed movement in the hallway outside James's office. Victoria had arrived early, and through the glass walls, I could see her talking animatedly with her assistant. Her body language was agitated, and she kept glancing toward James's office. "She knows I'm here," I observed. James followed my gaze. "I told her we were meeting to discuss the transition of your projects to other team members. And she believed that required 3 hours and a stack of confidential financial documents?" Before James could answer, Victoria appeared in the doorway. She was impeccably dressed as always, but her usual composed demeanor was cracked around the edges. "James, what's going on here? Why is she in your office reviewing company documents?" I looked up from the financial statements, meeting her gaze directly. "Good morning, Victoria. I'm reviewing materials related to my ongoing concerns about the company's strategic direction." Her face flushed. "Your ongoing concerns? Elena, you don't work here anymore. You have no right to access confidential information." "Actually," I said calmly, "I have every right to review these documents. James and I have a business relationship that extends beyond my employment status." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What kind of business relationship?" James looked like he wanted to disappear. This was the moment he had been dreading, the conversation he had been trying to avoid. But my partnership rights couldn't remain secret forever. Not if I was going to protect my investment and hold Victoria accountable for her decisions. "The kind of business relationship," I continued, "that gives me legal standing to question why company expenses have increased by 37% in 3 months, why we're entering into contracts with unsustainable profit margins, and why operational decisions are being made without proper financial analysis." Victoria's composure cracked completely. "James, what is she talking about? Why does she have access to financial information? Why are you letting her question my decisions?" The moment of truth had arrived. James could either stand up for our partnership and protect the company's interests, or he could continue enabling his wife's destructive leadership. The choice he made in the next 30 seconds would determine not only my future with Meridian Industries, but the future of the company itself. I closed the folder of documents and stood up, my decision crystallizing. Whether James found the courage to tell his wife the truth or not, I was done hiding. Victoria wanted to play power games, but she had been playing without knowing the rules. That was about to change. "Victoria," I said, my voice steady and professional, "I think it's time you learned exactly who you decided to fire yesterday. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.